Hello and welcome back to In the Box Part 3. This time I've added some more tracks, and what we're trying to get close to is a nice premix where we can bounce a file and then save that onwards to a separate mastering session that we'll look at a bit later. Here's the same piece we had before. Now I've added some guitar tracks, added some MIDI parts, and added a little bass part, simple bass part. I'll just go to the Stylus RMX instance and notice that in the mixer, each of these parts that are playing through our channels, we can take that part as is, or reprogram it, but take it as is and drag and drop it to the timeline exactly over the instrument that you want to play. So that's what's happened in this case. And then there's been a little bit of rearranging. So first of all, I had this groove going, and it's all routed through a Neve strip. All the monitoring's happening as it should, all the gain structure's happening as it should. And as you can see, right across the board, we've got this neg 10 reference point is what we want, with pre-fader metering turned on. Okay, neg more or less. Some of them are bumped up here a little bit because I've added a bit of compression and whatnot as I've gone along. So let's just pause that. And I'll just talk about the guitar for a little bit. You notice the guitar tracks, I've got an A section and a B section. It's a simple C9 to A9, and followed by E7 to F7, and then it's repeated, and that's it for the moment. But you notice there's a stereo guitar track and a mono guitar track, and then the next overdub is a stereo track and a mono track. Well, the mono track and stereo track relationship is interesting because all of this is been recorded via an 11 rack, which USBs into the computer, and essentially Pro Tools sees it as another interface. It has full control over the rack, and we have 2 of these racks in the Conservatorium studios, and it has wonderful amp simulations, pedals, cabinets, microphones, etc. Here's the front panel. You might have seen it in one of the racks in both Studio A and B. It has a very, very nice guitar input sensitivity level. It responds to various impedances and pickups. It feels like an amp. But on the back panel, it has a host of options. USB port sets it up as an interface. Digital recording, main recording. But that dry track I have in Pro Tools, you can patch that back into the 11R and essentially reamp anything you've recorded. It's also brilliant for bass guitars. It's the ultimate DI. This was recorded on a 1990s Les Paul Custom that I love a lot. And the sound's not a wall of sound rock and roll. It's probably towards R&B, and I quite like that. So if you want to do some more work on the 11R, it might be a future topic. Beautiful thing to record with, simple to set up, and it has this fabulous reamping option. So I've added that basic part, and after that I inserted an instance of Omnisphere, and it has a simple little bass part on it that you can also see on the timeline, but it's got a lot of nice subs, and together with the primary RMX kit, we've got a nice little bottom end going on that sounds like this. It's running through the Trident. Okay, couple other things to note here. I just started adding a really minimum amount of dynamics and EQ. As I said, we're trying to keep this with a minimum intervention as possible. Just show on that RMX kit, it has quite a lot of subs and some nice bottom end energy going on. And in this case, I'm a big fan of dynamic EQ because they can be quite transparent and you don't have to hit them too hard. And they do two things at once, both EQ and compression. I think we have a good selection of Waves tool, but in my case, I'm using a Magma rack, which is a bit like propeller heads, but it has a VST wrapper in it, so I can run up some of my favourite plugins by a Czech company called Melda. And this is their dynamic EQ, which has beautiful feedback, auto listen if you solo any of the bands, and an analyzer and a sonogram. Let's run it and have a look. So it's just gently keeping that drum kit under control, and it's nice how you can see these bigger frequencies here. Okay, so I'll let that sit. Next thing, I went back to a B section and introduced the second guitar part, which is a little bit more pushy. Another nice thing about the 11 rack is any of these settings can be embedded in the audio track itself, so you don't have to really worry about losing settings. You just custom program up what you want, and then it's actually recorded inside the part, and you can recall those by just grabbing a region and pulling back the setting. On the first track, you've seen that screen. We've got a Fender and an amp with a condenser on it. If we go to the second guitar track, pull that up, it's basically running a hotter Mesa style sound. It's not too overdriven, but it's just got a little bit more grunt. So we'll have a look at that. And I also introduced a little bit of automation here just for moving the guitars around. All the levels are still sitting nicely. Okay, so that's our little piece. That repeats with a couple of variations. Let's have a look at what's going on beyond this gain structure now. As I said, I've got a little bit of EQ going on here and there. I fiddled with the snare a little bit. Generally speaking, I just tend to use minimal EQ and define the region. Sometimes I have to tweak a little bit, but I roll off the bottom and roll off the top around the basic structure of the piece that I'm listening. That's usually a starting point. And again, it's fairly minimal, particularly in the bottom end. Just trim out what's not really required for that piece. And sometimes in the top end, I take out a bit because some of the samples and the scratchiness I may not want to hear. There's a lot of stuff up in the air there, particularly with VIs and limited things like guitars that aren't really important, and they just get in the way, so I tend to carve it out a little bit. Over on the buses, because I'm trying to now get this up on the master a little bit, I'll talk about that in a second, I'm using EQ and just a tiny bit of dynamics, as you'll see. This is on the first guitar bus. This is on the kit through the Neve bus. Just a little 3 to 1, just a little bit of threshold. On the API, which is the second beefier guitar track, just a little. Same thing, carving out the frequency range. And on the bass, the Trident. A little bit harder and a little bit more radical EQ because I want to get some of that bass out of the way of the kit. But overall, the changes are really quite minimal down here. Another thing that might be useful here too is also note that I've got the same instances of plugins, wherever possible, on the same strips across the board. If they're all in the same row, you can use the option command sequence on your keyboard, command option, option command, and click on a track, or plugin, sorry, and disable everything in that row. So that's actually very useful for A/Bing. So let's have a listen to a bit of this, and we'll turn off the tape, and we'll turn off the channel, and you can have a bit of a listen to that. No tape. Channel on, slate channel, tape back on. Kill the tape. Okay, it's subtle, but it's nice. It pulls it together. It has a bit of crosstalk there. It certainly, from my perspective, makes it much easier to do dynamics and EQ. It just seems much more forgiving. It melds the mix together in a nice way in the first place. Plus, we've got this terrific metering setup that really is much more like the real world. So when we're measuring RMS, average level, around about 0 on these tracks, where possible, I'm trying to make that sit about neg 10 headroom on each of the faders. Check out the trims, minus 6 dB on the guitars. On the VIs, stereo VIs, more like 9 because they're pretty hot. On the buses, not much going on there. Didn't find I had to do a lot because it's balanced up quite nicely through the slate. You can see I've dropped the group input in some cases. So a little bit of compression, a little bit of EQ, but most of the work is being done by trim and metering and our levels. So the next thing that happens, the last piece, is that all feeds to the master bus, and the master bus, as we talked about before, is a very special animal. Without gaining it up, it'll be quite pulled back, and it is at this stage now we want to do a pre-master print, but my absolute rule is never have any kind of bus compression or any kind of limiting on that bus, and simply see if you can do a mix that sits in the right range, that doesn't clip, that has good dynamics, but we're going to have to lift the level a bit. So in this case you can see on the way into the master bus we kick it back up to 6. And what we're referencing there is both the VU meter I've inserted, but also a couple of other nice meters. This is a dynamic range meter, another freebie, the TTDR, and also the Blue Cat. Now the Blue Cat is reference to Bob Katz's K14 standard. We could also pick it up a bit and go higher, but basically what these mean, K20, K14, K12, is we have that many dB of headroom. So we're trying to get the RMS sitting about 0 here, but that 0 is 14 dB below peak. 20, that would pull it back further. That's designed for film or big dynamic range, orchestral, perhaps jazz. K14, pop music, and K12, that's more like television and radio. And you can change these around all the time, but I find a nice thing to attempt to get to in the first instance is something close to K14. Now just remember that this isn't a mastering session, so we could be a bit more gentle with it, but let's have a look at it. I've picked it all up by 6 dB. Another thing you might notice is before these buses hit the master, I've got a submaster in between quite often what I like to do is insert a few things I might be liking to have a listen to before I hit mastering. I probably won't print these now, but some of the things I'd like to hear, check out my mix, and keep in mind for maybe I might use some of this on the mastering session. In this case, we've got a nice little bit of shimmer up the top with a clariphonic parallel equaliser. Just a little bit of air. Okay, so let's go back to our meters and have a look at that. So K14, and we can see with 6 dB pulled back, I'm getting the RMS sitting around about the 0 mark. And we're just short of clipping, and we've got a nice dynamic range. Okay, I'll roll that forward just a little bit and we'll check out this other meter as well. Around 15, 14 RMS, but this is also showing us our dynamic range, and that's quite nice too. We've got about 12, 13, 14 dB dynamic range. So this is at the stage I think I'd like to drop a pre-master. So as I said, I don't want to master it. I want to make a track that's in perfect shape that could go to a mastering house or back to our own session where we'd master a group of tracks together. There's a couple of ways you can do this. Obviously, one method is bounce the disc and then you sit there and listen to it in real time. And this is what I like to do and what a lot of other people like to do. We're going to turn on some hidden tracks here, and now what we've got is some extra tracks to record into if we wanted to. Here's a pre-master, and I can record directly from Tools back into here, but also I thought I'd just point out some stems. I can also take these 4 stems, or any number of stems you want to define. Try googling stem mixing, you'll see quite a lot on that. We could be sending files for film, we could be breaking files down into pieces for mastering. We might want to have vocals separate to the drums, for instance. There's all sorts of reasons you may want to mix off stems. One very good reason is if you run out of headroom and horsepower on the computer. But here's another reason I like to use it. If I bust all these to a set of buses that I defined and pull them back into 4 stem prints, I've then got 4 stereo files, and I could, for instance, send them to someone by YouSendIt or Gobbler, the new Pro Tools piece of integration. But one of my most regular ones is using Ohm Studio, which is an online DAW. So, for instance, I know a good friend of mine's a drummer, and he has a very well-equipped studio with different mics, different tracks, processing. He can send me back multi-channel parts, so I could upload that with a separate drum stem. He can log on to Ohm Studio in his own time, just mute my part, change the balance of the stems if he wants, load in a whole lot of tracks, and I go up there and I just drop those back to file and keep going. So it's the stem thing's also a lovely way to do collaboration. So we'll turn all those off for now. Don't know if you guys are into this, but I find this mandatory. I've got a reference track in there loaded up, and this is a piece by Aldi Meola off a recent album, and I really like the space, the EQ, the dynamic range. This is a mastered track, but I still think you might get the idea. We'll just play a little bit of that. loving the sound of that track. It gives me a good sense of bass and treble in particular, and I know my track's nowhere remotely near that because that's been a lot of work put into that, but I think you might be able to hear it gives me a little bit of a sense of particularly the extreme frequencies, the upper treble and the lower subs. Go back to Demiola. So it's always good to get that in the mix, I find. Keep your ears fresh. Go back to the top, set a range, say up to here. So we'll go and route this to a suitable bus, which I've already created, called 2Print. Same with the master fader, bus 2Print. Put an input monitoring mode. Let's see what we got. Route that to the right place. Here we go. Okay, so we're monitoring through a new track. Levels are good. And so there we go. We've got quite a nice level there. Let's just have a look at that track. Command Option right bracket zooms up, as you probably know. Command Option left bracket zooms down. But if we hit Command Option Control and hit the left bracket, we actually get the default waveform. It's default levels. And so that's looking pretty good to me. It's not slammed. It's got nice dynamic range. In fact, I'll just zoom that a bit and we'll have a look. Quite nice. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, one of the reasons, if you Google a bit about this, you'll see there's quite a lot of debate about whether this engine, the bounce engine, sounds different or not to this engine, which is, we can see that WAV file there, if I can find the thing, that one, Premaster 01, we can export that clip straight to disk without waiting for a long bounce time. Now we know we had to wait for a bounce just then because we saw it record, but this way you can drop a file straight out or use the keyboard command Shift Command K and just drop it straight to a folder and drop all your session files to a folder from different sessions and then load them up into a mastering session. Okay. If we use that command, it'll allow you to say what do you want. I use interleave wave and remember 32-bit floating point, I'd say, for mastering sessions. The sample rate's what it is. If you're at higher sample rate, I'd leave it at the native sample rate and do your conversion last thing in the mastering session. But we'll just cancel that. There's another really good reason why a lot of people use it this way. Several good reasons. One is your entire session has all your files in it, so file management's very practical. You've got your print in there, you could have your stems. In fact, later if you wanted to, you could probably pop the master back in, but the thing is all your files here, they're not scattered all over the place, so this is our pre-master. And obviously it's very easy to do it again, but how people really use it very effectively is if you wanted to remix a session or change anything, you can just use the Pro Tools punch-in and stitch this up and refine it in any way you want to. For film work, that could be quite useful if they're demanding new mixes or changes at the last minute. You've got your files sitting there, just change that little bit and drop it in, and it's seamless. Or you might be going back through the mix and you like most of it, you like the automation, you like the dynamics, but maybe you're just not happy with those few bars. Well, just go in and do some fine automation and just drop it in. It makes life really easy with assembling that final file when you get it the way you want it. Shift Command K, 32-bit, and export it. And it just drops down very quickly as a file. So I think in the next session, we'll have a look at that next mastering stages and what we do with these pre-masters. That's all for now. Bye.